Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Tonight, we delve into the latest installment of How to Make the World More Terrifying 101, with Russia's decision to move tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus. Yes, because when I think of calming international gestures, nothing soothes the soul quite like the nuclear weapons hitchhiking closer to NATO. As U.S. satellites show us the possible locations of these warhead storage facilities, we might wonder, is it an escalation the West will respond to, or will it lead to further escalation on the side of Russia? Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Recent developments in Belarus have raised concerns about the potential deployment of Russian nuclear warheads in the country. A military depot in central Belarus has undergone some upgrades, and officials believe that it's now ready to house Iskander missile launchers. Some documents on the renovations were leaked as early as February 2023, suggesting plans to transform this facility into a staging site for Belarus's Russia-supplied Iskanders. Recently, satellite imagery was released showing the upgrades, which include 4 security perimeters and a roof-covered guarded access point. Russian and Belarusian statements over the past 2 years have repeatedly claimed that nuclear weapons had been brought to Belarus. However, until now, there was no clear evidence that any facilities in the country had been repurposed to accommodate them. That is, of course, until Western officials confirmed news of the deployment, revealing that Russian storage facilities and railway links have been built in Belarus to house a nuclear arsenal. It's important to note that the deployment of such equipment in Belarus doesn't necessarily give Russia an upper hand in Eastern Europe militarily. It does, however, put additional pressure on NATO's eastern flank at a time of an uncertain security situation in the region.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Russia, in a move as subtle as taking a sledgehammer to the kneecaps, has decided that its nuclear arsenal needed a change of scenery, specifically several hundred miles closer to NATO territory. Imagine telling your neighbor, hey, I'm just going to move my collection of venomous snakes into your backyard for convenience, no biggie. Putin, always a bride at the geopolitical intimidation wedding, announced his charming relocation project last June, presumably because his calendar was like Tuesday, Pilates, Wednesday, global nuclear anxieties. And now some say this move is more about political messaging than actual military strategy. Because, when you've got nearly 6,000 nukes, what's a few hundred miles between friends? Or in this case, not friends, more like neighbors who casually wave but secretly fear a fiery apocalypse. Defense experts are divided. Some shrug it off, saying the Russians can reach any place in NATO with nuclear missiles anyway, which is sort of like saying why worry about the tiger in your living room, it could have eaten you from the backyard. Comforting, right? Honestly though, by now it seems Russia is playing the long game of how many ways can we freak out NATO without actually starting World War III. Putin's reassurances are as reassuring as a dentist with shaky hands, while Western intelligence has been tracking these nuclear escapades like a hawk with a telescope. And let's not forget Belarus's role as the eager-to-please friend, with President Lukashenko basically saying, sure, store your world-ending weapons in my yard, what could go wrong? And although few people are truly worried about a potential nuclear confrontation, one has to wonder, is the Cold War making a comeback tour? Because it does seem like Russia's hitting all the classic notes, but with a modern, terrifying remix. And so, as we ponder a world where nuclear threats are just another Tuesday, we're reminded that sometimes the thing we are searching for are also the ones we least want to find. Like those nuclear warhead storage facilities some 400 miles east from here. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Mr. Alan Flowers, the chairman of the Anglo-Belarusian Society. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Oh, good morning. It's yes, Dr. Alan Flowers. I should point out, yes, I am the chairman of the Anglo-Belarusian Society, but I'm here today speaking entirely in an independent capacity, and I'm sitting in the centre of London speaking from my Institute of Engineering and Technology, because as some of you might not know, I am a nuclear physicist, and I've been engaged with questions about nuclear issues for almost all of my life, certainly, at least the last.
Brilliant. That's awesome. Then let's dive right into it then. Because, well, one of the things that's on top of our mind, of course, we saw the satellite footages of these nuclear warheads stationed in Belarus. Should we start looking for a bomb shelter at this point?
No. It would be a very short answer to that. Look, we have to be very careful with all this. And I'd ask all your viewers, just stop, think. What's different about anything we've heard about in the last week? Yes, some images of some kind of tubular, they're objects that look like, and they may well be the sort of metallic casing, the shells. But I've not been close to any of these units. Certainly material has been observed. It's very classic transporter materials with some kind of rockets on them. But we don't actually know what is in there. What we do know is we've had this threat about tactical nuclear weapons. Let's separate a tactical. These are short-range things. They're the sort of things you would fire in a battlefield. So if, and I want to say if, there really are tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, it is about this threat. And yes, Poland is absolutely right to be very concerned, as is Lithuania very right to be concerned. It's a sort of thing that potentially could be used in a threat to the Suwalki Gap, as many of you, of course, will know. That's this location up at northwest Belarus, which is the gap that would join Belarus to Kaliningrad. So, of course, remember, Russia is positioned there in Kaliningrad, and there is a distance there which is clearly a logical threat. But on a higher scale, Russia has over 6,000 nuclear weapons, intercontinental ballistic weapons. At a higher level, what's new? There is no new major threat requiring NATO to take really any more different posture than it already has. So let's be careful. Now, I do have great respect for TV Poland, and it's really right to raise this issue, but let's not allow Putin to win with what I consider is this just diversionary tactics. Move a few transporters with a rocket on the top of it, and people are spotting these with the satellite photography, and we're on having an interview about it.
Right. So like you mentioned, this might just be another attempt at saber rattling and kind of causing a stir in the public society.
It's going to keep you busy talking about this instead of talking about the serious problem of the war in Ukraine, talking about the lack of sanctions. Now, it's right. We should be squeezing. And I think there is a motion, there's a question being asked in the European Parliament to deal with this question, that maybe what we should be doing is, look, if Putin's going to play these games, we really need to turn the screw a lot more. And, areas which we could be acting on, I have no idea why, particularly on Belarus. Why is a message not going? Mr. Lukashenko, if you're going to accept and play this game, you suffer economically big time. And we really close down. I mean, I know there's been a lot of talk about closing the trade down, but we've really not got it in place as it should be. Loads of loopholes and sanctions. I do hope that this will backfire, because as a result of raising this issue, we got the European Parliament, asking questions. What is going on? Are these tactical nuclear weapons a threat to us? And how do we respond? So what we should be doing is responding to this kind of action and reminding us we really need to toughen our stance in all sorts of ways, including in the case of Belarus, the human rights issue.
I really appreciate that line of logic. Like you said, this nuclear saber rattling might actually lead to the European Union to take a closer look at the situation, especially now we know that we're looking again once into the sanctioning of Belarus being even more strengthened, and publication have been realizing that we see like a major spike in export from Belarus of seafood, which makes no sense. Hence, we can deduce that they're using, Russia has been using Belarus to dodge all these type of sanctions. So back to the question of Belarus, though, we do know that they're using it as a jump board to avoid sanctions and to station some of the missiles. But how much are they really involved when it comes to the boots on the ground and any war effort?
Well, let's separate two sorts of boots on the ground. Belarus, in terms of front-line capability, has only about 8,000 or so troops. Another point is that in terms of the call-up, the young men and women that are called up now, 3 years on from 2020, we know, and from my personal contacts in Belarus, and by the way, I've been hosting a great Belarusian politician and diplomat, Andrei Sanikov, is actually with me in London. I'm just after this interview about to meet with him for some important meetings in London. And he, if anybody, knows very well the Belarus stance and position. And he's citing a couple of points. One is he's aware the army really is a somewhat disaffected group. These young people, hundreds, if not thousands of them, were on the demonstrations 3 years ago. You know, the likening for Lukashenko in action. Now, I'm sure they know it. I mean, notice there's not really been much engagement of the Belarus military. Now, there's the other aspect, and that is the land of Belarus is just a military camp for Russia. And Lukashenko is a convenient manager of Putin's military training facilities and stationing. Now, this is where the West, and I would champion what the same as Andrei Sanikov was saying. Look, if we could just get rid of Lukashenko first, he's surely the easier one. Put the pressure, put it really, really hard. The people are ready, and it's a matter of timing as well. Now, there's a lot to debate on this, but I hope that this discussion now will rekindle the debate. Why are we not turning our focus on Lukashenko? Remember, if we got rid of him, if he'd gone in 2020, there would have been no Russian troops invading Ukraine from the north. I don't know why Ukraine isn't shouting louder about this as well. Sanikov calls it the balcony. There is above Ukraine, there is this Belarus threatening. And Russian soldiers standing there with their nuclear weapons, their tanks, their armaments.
Right. You brought up a very good point about Lukashenko, and we do know that an election is going to happen next year. Do you think there will be any kind of a way to oust him, or do you think this will be another election that looks eerily similar to what happened in Russia?
No, it will not be similar to what happened in Russia in terms of the lack of action. I mean, the people really, it's terribly oppressive. There they kill the leaders, as we know. I mean, by good fortune, although we have the leadership of the Belarus election in 2020, I mean, let's remind everybody, Tikhanovskaya, Barbaria, Sebkala, the main leaders, and Statkevich, not to mention the great veteran, Nikolai Statkevich, arrested in May 2020. They are all still nearly 4 years on in prison, held back, but they are there. So number one, release the political prisoners. If we could get the leadership, and I'm talking on behalf of my good friends, the Belarus people, and not only that, on behalf of Europe, the world, get political prisoners out. Now look at history. Look at what happened in South Africa. Nelson Mandela released. Once you get, and Lukashenko knows this. Why is Lukashenko holding on to them? He's got to keep them in there. He's got to keep them away from the action, the preparation. And everything will follow. So maximum pressure, there's a call. This tactical nuclear weapon debate, it's fantastic because it gives me the chance to remind everybody. And also in European Parliament, we have great politicians in there. Poland's taking a really good lead in this. So is Lithuania. I'm hoping to see in the next coming weeks really heavy pressure to the point that Lukashenko has to decide maybe he's really on the wrong side of history. And the first give he'll do is massive release. And by the way, the call, and I'm repeating the call from Andrei Sanikov, is release all. Don't trade. In 2012, he was traded. He was traded. They released him and I think it was Bondarenko, but they didn't release Statkevich. He was in prison again at that time. And they played a game, and nothing happened. So there were still so many imprisoned in 2015. Heads were down, and they didn't have the people. So we've got to have the people, we've got to have the leadership. And that's stage one.
Right, absolutely brilliant. And I would like to go back to what you mentioned earlier about the call-up and these young men and women used to being like activists and now somehow being enlisted in the Belarusian army. And I'm a little bit confused about how that came to be. Can you help us understand a little bit of that?
Well, they have conscription. In Belarus, there's conscription. So Euro 1819 in 2020, there is a call-up, and I forget how long they serve, but they've got to be in there. I mean, unless they've left the country. Of course, many of the best brains of Belarus are out in Poland. Many, of course, are in Warsaw, Vilnius. There's some of my very, very good friends I know so well from 20 years ago. But they're just waiting to get back into Belarus. There is a coiled spring of energy, great intelligence and ability waiting to resurrect Belarus out of this dreadful situation of Mr. Lukashenko. He is, of course, not the elected president. He is somebody, a self-appointed head of managing the lands of Belarus. I wouldn't just grace him with as a manager working on behalf of Mr. Putin under his instructions. And that is it, Mr. Manager Lukashenko. So let's get rid of him. But to get back to your young people, yeah, they're now aged 21, 22, conscripted. And, in fact, the call from Mr. Sanikov and many others was if the Ukrainian army had gone into Ukraine, majority most likely would have changed sides. I mean, all they would have done is fed a few thousand soldiers to go and assist the Ukrainian army. And by the way, I'd remind you, a similar thing happened in the war. In Belarus, the fascists conscripted Belarusians. They made a stupid mistake. They put them to the Western Front. I got to know personally some of these wonderful Belarusians. Father Alexander Natsan, the great priest in London, he defected. He found his way through the lines and he joined Anders' army. Right. Anders' army, the Poles, in the Second World War, had Belarusians fighting with them who'd changed sides. History is on the side of this. Belarusians today, in 2024, they would, I am very sure, many in their thousands would do the same. The difference is they wouldn't be fighting with the Polish army this time against Hitler. They'd be fighting with the Ukrainian army against Hitler Putin, the new Putler, the new
right.
great, calls himself friend and leader of the people. But no, that would happen. Have I explained it?
Absolutely brilliant.
You know?
Thank you so much for your input and insight. Yeah, that really shed some light on the topic at hand. So really appreciate you coming on once again. And thank you so much again for being with us on Eastern Express.
Greeting and farewell from a very sunny London today. Thank you for having me on. Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the latest stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Since Russia's onslaught in Ukraine began, European powers have frozen a significant amount of Russian assets, over 250 billion euros worth to be exact. And now the European Commission has announced plans on how better to manage these funds.
In a new move by the European Commission, Ukraine will receive an additional several billion euro of financial assistance per year. The move will be made possible by the EU leveraging a hefty sum of Russian assets frozen across the entire bloc in response to Moscow's aggression. According to plans, around 90% of the seized funds, around 260 billion euro in total, could help fund Ukraine's military, while the remaining 10% would help finance Ukraine's defense industry and recovery fund. The profits from interest accrued, around 3 billion per year, will act as an additional cash injection for the embattled country. Ukraine welcomed the news, but continued to pressure European leaders to also move the funds from the frozen assets as early as possible. The first transactions are expected to take place as early as July.
Staying on the topic of Ukraine, the country's parliamentarians are putting their foot down. Dozens of deputies from President Zelensky's Servant of the Nation party are dissatisfied with the current state of parliament.
Lacking motivation, dozens of MPs from Ukraine's Verkhovna Rada have voiced frustration with the current state of parliament. According to them, Ukraine has moved away from its traditional parliamentary cabinet system and moved toward a more president-centric state. This, understandably so, was prompted by the war, but parliamentarians worry that the current state of affairs is doing the country more harm than good. Ukrainian deputies have been complaining about their lack of any real influence on processes taking place in Ukraine, while at the same time expressing readiness to resign their posts. The head of the dissatisfied faction announced that a total of 17 MPs had submitted resignation requests. Now, authorities are worried that this could start a domino effect. On a side note, Parliament has also seen a decline in public support since the start of the war. Only around 15% of Ukrainians put their trust in the Verkhovna Rada, which is widely seen as the president's instrument for pushing new legislation.
Due to ongoing fighting in Russia's Belgorod, Ukraine's volunteer units have appealed to its inhabitants to immediately evacuate the area. Fighting here between Russian forces and Russian volunteers on Ukraine's side has been taking place for a few days now.
Russian volunteer units fighting on the side of Ukraine have declared that a complete evacuation of Belgorod is necessary due to fighting in the region. At the same time, members of the Freedom of Russia Legion are accusing Putin's troops of using civilians in Belgorod as human shields. 3 volunteer units staffed with Russian volunteers and fighting against Moscow are pushing on with attacks and strikes on military targets, which have left civilians dead. The fighters also accused authorities in the Belgorod region of obstructing the evacuation. Fighting between Putin's troops and Russian volunteers siding with Ukraine has been ongoing since March 12th, leaving 16 dead to date.
The search for a new holiday destination is over. Now, the Russian and Belarusian authorities are working to establish a rail connection with Crimea, with the first visitors to set foot there before the onset of the tourist season.
What better place to spend an exciting holiday than in the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula? Belarusians need not look further, as a new rail link scheduled to open in a matter of weeks will offer them the opportunity to vacation in occupied Crimea. Work on this project has supposedly been taking place for 2 years now. According to initial reports, Belarusian citizens will be able to travel to Russia by rail, after which they will take special train cars going to occupied Crimea. But that's not all. Occupation authorities are also thinking about launching a direct air route, too. Back in 2021, Belarusian strongman Lukashenko declared Crimea de facto Russian territory, but has refrained from officially recognizing Russia's annexation of the Ukrainian peninsula or any other regions of Ukraine. Lukashenko himself is also yet to set foot in Crimea, but the summer holidays may prove an ideal moment for just that.
And with that, we conclude this edition of Eastern Express. But for more news update and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.